It's my pleasure to have today as a guest one of the top coaches in our industry, Patrick Tuor. How are you, Patrick?
Fine, thank you. Thank you for having me, David.
The first question which I'd like to ask you, because the subject we have already decided to be an accountability and a being coachable athlete. But before we start, for how long have you been coaching already?
Well, actually, I started coaching as soon as I started competing. Back in the day, it was different than today. You had no internet. Really, the job as a coach, as you intended today, didn't exist. So you would go to the biggest guy in the gym, or the guy who competed in the gym. And in my first show that I did in 1993, um, I pretty soon found out that I was the one trying to find answers and making sense of what we do. So, not even asking, people would come to me as I was prepping. So for my first show, I actually prepped my training partner, helped him. So that's, 20, but 23, 20, almost 30 years ago, actually. So, and then ever since then, I was competing and coaching at the same time, and, slowly learned the process, learned the job. So it's been 30 years.
Lots of things have definitely changed because, as you said, there was no so-called coaching. But as the time progressed, you have definitely had more athletes, more inquirers, more people from the outside of Switzerland because you lived in Switzerland, right?
Right.
And where did you become a pro? Did you become as a world championship winner,
Yes.
or yeah? Because if I recall well, you have won the world championships. And then when did you realize that you are going to be a better coach than an athlete? Because you were quite good. I remember your photos. You were a large person, but what took away from the joy of competing and brought more fun to the coaching aspect?
Um, it's not like a conscious decision that you take from one day to the other. You have to understand it's a process. So as I started competing, many times I found myself helping people who were actually better than me. Even when I was finally able to turn professional, which back in the day was a little more difficult than today. Um, I was still able to help people who I knew, on stage looked better than myself. So, it's seeing who was competing at the time, the big names. I stood on stage with Ronnie Coleman, with Marcus Rule, with Dennis James, with Jay Cutler. My first show, Ronnie, Jay, they all were there. So you get really fast an idea of what it means to be a top professional. And back in the day, you didn't have this middle pack, or you couldn't really make a living if you weren't a top pro. So for me at the time, it was more of a rational decision, a survival decision, because, you needed to make a living at the same time, and wanting to be a professional and seeing all these guys that I competed against, I realized I didn't have the genetic makeup, the structure to be able to compete with them. So probably unconsciously at first, I really started to put more effort into trying to help people who actually had this type of potential, and having success, or more success with that, is something you build up your your confidence also to a certain extent. So slowly, I realized I couldn't be a top professional, not back in the day. I couldn't make a living being a professional. So then where I started to maybe, and I said at first it's more unconscious. It's not like a decision that you take, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Because also back in the day, you the ability to make money, we're talking early 2000s, there was still no really social media like today. So you would just be able to coach people who knew you personally, or maybe through friends. So it wasn't like a job decision, a professional decision, which you could make at the time. And then I opened the gym, I opened two gyms, I opened nutrition, like all those things that somebody coming from bodybuilding actually does, until I really think social media start to come out, and then people recognize your work, and then after that, it was a conscious decision to sell everything else. And, actually, I stopped competing in 2003 as a professional. So my career was pretty short. And again, it was a different world than it is today. The bodybuilding landscape changed so much over the last 10, 15 years. So many opportunities came out, and today we're living in a totally different world. So again, it's been a slow process.
When speaking about the leaving the stage, so to speak, you still wanted to stay relevant and stay in business because you are passionate about it. So as you said, you decided to move into another direction because that's your words, they were better than you. They weren't necessarily training harder or staying according to the diet harder and so on, it's more strict. They just were born different.
Look, the same thing happened to me as I was playing basketball. Before bodybuilding, I was a basketball player. I played in the NCAA Division I college in the US. I was a good player, and I had a professional contract in Europe too. But then again, it's always a question of how far do you want to go into your sport? Are you happy? Are you satisfied with being good? Maybe making a little money, or do you want to be at the top of your craft, of your sport? And in basketball, I wasn't able to do that. I'm 5'10", white, so
yeah, we can't jump.
Yeah, not much. So it's, again, you have to, sometimes it's, passion and rationality, they conflict each other. So I think I'm a very objective and rational person. So I know what I can and I know what I cannot do. And at the end of the day, it's, you have to make some hard decisions, but always have to look at the long term and make sure you're doing the right thing for you, for your family, for your professional career. So that's why I had to take those, hard decisions. I would have kept competing because I had fun doing it. It's not hard. I mean, it's hard to stop doing something that you put so much effort into. And let's say it's fun, being on a diet, some people perceive it as hard, as torturous. For me, it was fun, seeing your body transform, getting lean, getting on stage. That was fun. So, but at the same time, if you put IFBB Pro before your name, then professional means making money, means, providing a living for you, for your family. And that was not the case. So as much as I love it, you have to do something that's, allowing you to pay your bills too. So at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to.
Life is a business, that's the fact. And if you are not, as you said, all times were different because even nowadays, it changed for wars because you can be the top-notch athlete and you still can have little of contracts. May he rest in peace, Sean Roden, if you recall, he didn't have plenty of contracts, even though he was the best in the world. So you have to advertise. But what was different and better in all times when it comes to bodybuilding? Because what I have realized the most is the amount of athletes that compete. Nowadays, as you see the shows, I'm really getting sad because the open bodybuilding, when you get the first, lists, it can be 5 people, 6 people. In the end, we get up to the 8 of competitors, which is going to end up as the shows being cancelled or the category being cancelled because it will just not be profitable for the costs.
Yeah, I think the main reason that this is slowly changing is that there are other classes. When I was competing as a professional, you only had open men's bodybuilding, so that's it. So if you wanted to get into bodybuilding, that's where you ended up. You had no other choice. Now, obviously, with the classic, with the men's physique, a lot of guys don't even get to that point or don't even have that aspiration because there are steps before becoming so big and muscular that you can take and be successful. So I think that's the biggest thing that happened to bodybuilding is other classes. Otherwise, you would still see 40 people in a professional show if we didn't have classic and men's physique. That's just the way it is. But I think it's good. It's good that people have an option to decide how much they want to develop their body. So, and it's good for bodybuilding, for exposure. Many people cannot relate to, open bodybuilding. So I think overall it's a good move. But I also think, coming back to your statement that shows are canceled, the biggest change they've made this year in open bodybuilding is that they took out the point system.
Yep.
Now, I talk to a lot of guys, every day. And the fact that now you don't have a chance to qualify through points just drastically takes away, that middle tier bodybuilder open, which is not really motivated to go into shows because he clearly knows I'm never going to win a show, and that's not the way, I'm going to get exposure. And actually, if you don't win shows, you're just paying money, traveling. And I fully understand it. And on the other side today, through social media, posting your pictures, posting your videos, you can get just as much exposure and fan base than competing. Back in the days, you had to compete to be relevant. Now you don't have to compete to be relevant. So really, I think this year, by taking out the point system, they took away a lot of guys that, in my opinion, and talking to them, would have competed if the point system was still in place. So I think for the open class specifically, that's a big change.
Especially when we are going to have anyway, like 45 classic guys, 60 of the men's physique, 60 bikini girls, and so on. So they should do it kind of differently, or make it more like a number of people which we want in class. For example, every class can have 20 people. You yourself have 2 athletes who could have already competed on the Olympia stage on the Open, because Stanimol was in the top three times. Yes. And John De La Rosa was second 2 times. Stanimol was in the top 3. So they would have already enough points to be in an open bodybuilding. And I think that it would benefit them a lot because of the exposure and so on. But that's the change of the rules. And we can't really, speak about it or even have any interruption, or we can just, debate, and perhaps someone is going to listen one day. What were differences between the coaching now? And let's not go back this far, as you said, the 30 years ago, but let's say, for example, 15 years ago, because there was still like 20 years ago. I remember quotes of other competitors who were saying that you had to, for example, mail your pictures to your coach with a FedEx.
Yeah, well, obviously now the coaching is much easier because, like I'm talking to you now and I see you in front of me, I can do that with, my athletes. Yes. So you don't have to see them in person. And honestly, I have been at shows with the athlete, and I have been at home with a camera looking at the athlete. And, I've had success both ways, and I messed up both ways. So it's like, there's no real advantage. So that's obviously a big plus for a coach and even for an athlete, to be able to connect. But the biggest difference, I think, in today's competitive landscape is just the mentality the athletes have. Everything is questionable. Many athletes believe they have a lot of knowledge, which sometimes is true. Sometimes you have discussions with an athlete because he is very knowledgeable, but I would say the majority of the time, being so influenced by social media, by what other people's do, being able to see what other people's are putting out there, puts a lot of question in your own head. So you're actually diluting a lot, the prep or the way you should think, instead of focusing what is important, which is caloric deficit, cardio, suffering, getting in shape, and focus your energy on that. You're distracted by, but I'm seeing this, or this guy's doing this. And back in the days, we didn't have that. Back in the days, we know we had to get those striations in those glutes, and we know we just didn't eat. You take out those carbs, get on the treadmill, and do whatever you have to do to get in shape. Now, today, you have athletes pretend to have a understanding and making sense of how to get in shape. Yes, but I'm a little too flat. Maybe we should do this. Maybe my sleep is not so good, and they want to have all parameters under check. It's a therapy. You're doing a therapy to get in shape. As obviously we have more knowledge today, and there are certain things we have learned. We don't have to break the bar to make it work. We are a little more smart about the approach, but at the end of the day, it's still the guy who works the hardest. It's still the guy who's the most genetically gifted. It doesn't come down to a mathematical equation. It's balls to the walls, get in shape, you do what you have to do, and obviously with the experience that comes along. But and today's, I see a lot of guys, they just pretend to feel well or feel decently and get in shape and get down to 5% body fat, because so much, I would say, shit is out there on the internet that you believe there is always a better way to do things, where it just isn't.
As you said, we don't have to break the wall, but we have to bend it a little. We have to bend it a little always, because it's an extreme. We have to get to the extremes of 4 or 5% of body fat, as you said. And nowadays, people want everything easier, even though they have access to cream of rice, all of those, funky flavors and so on, all of the sweeteners, which all these people did not have access to. And if you haven't done the prep, because most of us still have done a prep when you were on a 50 carbs, 2 hours of cardio, fish, and so on. If you even prep once like this, then every prep, when you have like 200 grams of carbs, 300 grams of carbs, is easy peasy. When people are complaining about, I'm on the low carbs, and you ask him, how low? 350. You're like, really? That's a low carb. But I do understand that for some people it can be low, but you need to understand other way and other path, that there is no other way, as you said, than being balls to the walls and working your ass off. Who was the first biggest name that you have coached?
Well, names, there's one, but I don't want to mention it because we had a lot of discussions. Actually, the first big success that I had was coaching a Swiss bodybuilder who won the overall at the IFBB World Championships. He was a 75 kilo athlete, up to 75, and he won the overall in Mumbai at the IFBB World Championships. So that's like, before that I had some European champions, but that's like, back in the day, winning an IFBB World overall title, that was a big thing. And doing it weighing 75 kilos, with super heavies or heavyweights, there wasn't super heavies, against Chelistov back in the day, it was like 125 kilos. That was my happiest moment back in the day. That was something very, very special.
You yourself mentioned that you messed up a few times. You are one of the few coaches that really can admit when you do something wrong. Why is that? Do you think that it is a matter of ego, or that you are just a humble person that can really say that, okay, I have done something wrong, I know how to figure it out, I will try to figure it out and face it and just face the consequences?
Well, I think, the first thing you have to do is be honest to yourself. If it's white, it's white. If it's black, it's black. Don't try to see something that it's not there. And it's not an exact science. You can do 10 times everything really, really well. That doesn't mean that the 11th time is going to go well as well, because you're not just coaching a machine, you're coaching a human body with that has feelings, that has stress, that so there's so many variables that come into play that sometimes even doing, on a nutrition side, metabolically, the right thing can turn out to be wrong. So every situation is different, every person is different, and it just can happen. And I think as a coach and even as an athlete, when you did not do your best. When, a certain situation that you thought was going to go a certain way actually didn't. That happens. I mean, and sometimes, it's for the good. You can't always be your 100% best. You can be close to it, but sometimes going through a process which you see is not the right one, if you are smart and if you're objective and you see where everything, did not go the way you want, makes you better. That's where you learn from. You rarely learn from doing things the right way. My biggest, learnings and improvements that I made as a coach is where things did not go right. So actually, these are things that it's hard to take in, especially when it's big shows. But there are things that just make you a better coach and make you a better athlete because you see what can actually happen. And so next time, when you approach even with another athlete, there are things that you learn from this that makes it better. So there's no point in denying, no point in blaming somebody else or, fate, God, or, bad water. It's not a exact science. And, as many times as you can do it perfectly, and I did it perfectly or very good a lot of times, there's always that one time where just the situation or circumstances don't allow you to think the way you want, and the situation just is not in your control. So you learn from it, and it's good to admit it.
You spoke about the science. Don't you think that nowadays people base their whole methodology around the science? Because of course we can learn from it, but as you said, there are many things that are just not understandable for us as prepping somebody.
Absolutely. I agree with you. Look, I think you have to have both. The most important aspects for any coach is experience, is, having done it many, many times. And I've coached hundreds of athletes, I've on shows over 30 years. So experience is the number one thing, but understanding the process is also very important. So, not just going through the motions. There are coaches maybe who don't really understand what's going on, physiologically, metabolically. And that's okay. You can still, put somebody on stage. That's pure experience. But I think if you have a combination between having an understanding how an organism works under certain circumstances, especially also with the drugs, and the experience, the two serve each other. Now, only science or trying to get in shape through following certain scientific principles is not possible. It just doesn't work that way, especially not in bodybuilding, not when you have these enhanced bodies that just physiologically do not respond like, a normal human being. So, but at the same time, if you have an understanding of certain processes and the experience, then one serves the other again. But don't use science to try to make sense. Use practice, and then with knowing certain aspects of science, you can try to understand what actually happened in there. But I would never use, let's just call it science, but use science to manipulate or to do certain things. Experience always comes first.
As you said, because there are people are not only an organism, as you said, there are as well physiological and psychological patterns which happen that we are not always aware of and we are not always told of. And that's when we come to the main subject of our conversation. What does make our one athlete coachable? And let's start with the diet, because we often hear, as you said, I'm too flat, or even jokingly, the people say that when you tell them that you're looking good, you're going in the right direction, they're like, yeah, perhaps we should have some cheat meal or something like this, which I know that you are not, not a fan of cheat meals, but still, about the diet, what makes an athlete and coachable person?
Well, it's very simple, trusting in the process, trusting in the collaboration, and putting one-to-one what is in the plan in practice. If you do that, if you accept to go through that process, I can say 99.9% of the time you will be in shape. You have a great look. When an athlete tries to, I see a lot of times either not following the plan because he just doesn't have the discipline to do it, or because he himself wants to add some things in the mix and the coach is not aware of it, then it's almost impossible for any coach to be able to, find the right way to get you in shape on stage. You're always trying to mend holes left and right and trying to make sense of a thing that actually doesn't make sense, because what you think is happening is not really, what the athlete is doing. So an athlete has to understand, if he reaches out to a coach, right or wrong, you have to go through a process one-to-one, because both will learn from it. If you're not 100% committed, then you will end up not being your best, and neither the coach nor the athlete will learn from the process. So there's no win situation in there. The only thing that you win from is that maybe by cheating you'll feel good for 2 hours here and there. But at the end of the day, if the goal is to win a professional show or any show that you do, if you want to learn from it, if you want to become a better bodybuilder, and that's the process in bodybuilding, is you always think of the show that you are doing next, but you have to be a little more looking forward. There are more shows that are going to come. So no matter how good you were here, what did we learn from this? What can we do better? And you can improve little things at every time, but that can only happen if an athlete also is doing exactly what they're supposed to do. Then I'm not saying an athlete cannot have input. Actually, I love it when athletes, are a little more open to discussing and telling me what is going on and what their impressions are. But at the end of the day, an athlete is very rarely objective. An athlete doesn't, do something simply because of the way he looks, but a lot of times the way he feels that day comes into play when making a decision. So you look a certain way, that makes you feel good or bad, and in function of that, you make a decision. The coach has to be somebody who is very neutral. I only make decision based on what I see from an update, how your physique looks, where your weight is going, where your energy level is at, maybe put into play. So I'm not considering your state of mind. Obviously you do, but not when making, nutritional changes. Mentally, the mental aspect comes more into play in the discussions that we have. Maybe, you need some motivational talk. Maybe you need to talk as a friend. Maybe there are things going on in somebody's life that just need to be heard. Those things are part of it. But when taking, nutritional and training or drugs decision, I can only base what I do in function of how you look. And an athlete is just not able to do that, because there are other aspects, especially mental aspects, that just cloud the way he sees himself. And that's why having a coach, in my opinion, is an advantage.
Let's speak about things that people might consider as right ones to do, but we both know that they are not so. Which are those things, for example, in a diet that you often find, like, for example, not counting vegetables and so on? Which are the most often things? Because cheating, we can skip it. If someone cheats, he's well aware of. But what are the things that you consider not being 100% according and strict to the plan?
Well, there are many things. For example, nutritional timing. Before going into what you eat, is your planned or the diet is set up for you to train after 2 meals and you train after 5 meals. The plan is for you to be, having cardio after your workout, or maybe in the morning, and you do your cardio before you go to bed. A lot of things that people take for granted is like, yeah, I did my 60 minutes cardio, yeah, but you did them after your workout, or things they just don't tell you. You're supposed to train after 4 meals because we needed to get some carbs in before you train today, because it's a weak body part, and you trained after your first meal, and then we have all those carbs going in after your training, which really energy wise is not going to do us any good. So little things like that, which they add up at the end of a prep. Having maybe 60 minutes cardio in the morning and actually doing 30 minutes cardio sessions. Again, I'm not saying that can't be done. It's just that what you're doing does not make sense to me anymore, because your physique will respond a different way. The worst things are all those, empty calorie sauces that there is today. I see guys adding, 0% ketchup or all those sauces to every meal. Those just contain a lot of artificial flavors, sweeteners.
Yeah, and
that
still they may contain some calories because they are sugar-free, for example, but people don't check on the back on the label that there is a fat, there is a carb. They might be sugar-free, of course, but there is still some carbs and some fats and some protein.
Yeah, polyalcohols, but it's not just that. It's the way it impacts your digestive tract. It's the way it impacts how your body responds to a meal. Now, if you're eating a very low carb, high protein meal, the way your excitement is to eat the meal is not very high. You're just hungry and you eat. Now, if your body, your taste buds starts to get a lot of sweet taste, and your body responds differently. Your body is tricked into believing there are high calorie dense food coming in, and the metabolic response is not the same. Now, I know that scientific literature tells us different, or it's controversial, but I know from experience that's just what happens. And I see a lot of guys having digestive issues, bloating, the way the food is absorbed, the way your insulin is released is not just what's going on systemically, but also what your brain signals to your body that's actually going on. So it's a combination of your brain perceives a certain type of stimulus through the food, and then systemically something else happens. So there are just things that I think, if you are serious about bodybuilding, you put your health at risk, because let's be honest, it's not, you don't do it to be the healthiest person in the world. There's still some risk involved. You're training hard, you're sacrificing a lot of things. That's the first thing that I would do, is I eat the food that I'm supposed to eat, and I'm not feeding my mind, I'm feeding my body. I'm not trying to make things taste good. Now, okay, you can add a little spices here and there. I'm not saying that's bad, but trying to make every meal be like a master chef meal and taste good, and being so dependent on taste when dieting, that never ends up, really, really well. Or using too many supplements, too many protein shakes, because I don't want to cook my food. Or, I gave you 200 grams of chicken and you drink 50 grams of whey isolate, and then 2 months later you say, yeah, but it's the same amount of protein. It just adds up and doesn't end up giving you the same result.
Patrick, and when it comes to the off season, would you still, if someone struggles with the food, because we know that isolates and so on, even though we are both sponsored by the companies, they're luxury. They're not necessary. We can admit it. They are luxury that can help, of course, but when it comes to the off season, and if someone struggles with eating, even though we know that we have to struggle, either it's off season or prep, would you then give them a chance of having an extra shake towards the food?
Yes, that can be an option. For example, in the morning, if you don't want to eat your 12 egg whites in an off season, if you drink a very high quality, 50-gram whey hydrolysate, If you know the quality is good, and there are some good companies out there who make a very good product, I
You're
can
working
see
with
it work.
Yamamoto, yes?
Yes, that that can work absolutely. That's just introducing a little less volume to your stomach. But most of the time, you know, every situation is different. So you really see why are you not hungry? Maybe there are other issues going on. Is it the amount of food? Or is it just your insulin sensitivity? Is it your recovery? Maybe there are other things that you can look at before simply saying, "Oh, I'm going to start drinking shakes." But also, a lot of the times, instead of forcing food upon a system, because many times I've seen out of experience, if you're not hungry or if you force that too long, also your response is not going to be positive. So I can see an athlete start holding more water, being more lethargic, trainings are not efficient. So forcing food upon someone, I think you can do it maybe for a limited time, but the best solution in that case is always trying to cycle the amount of food that you eat. So you can push it a little bit, but then when the digestion is not optimal, your stomach, is full all the time. Also, the way you absorb these nutrients is not going to be efficient. So it's better to cut back on the calories, or maybe systematically have days where you just eat less and trying to maintain that. That's a very important aspect that you touch on, is make sure your food absorption stays optimal in the off season. Many times you see guys starting the prep and actually start growing because you reduce the calories, not, and you don't even change the drugs. It's because the food absorption is better, their energy levels are better. So shakes, okay, but most of the time it's not the answer that you need.
There are better supplements. For example, as you said, there are loads of inflammatory responses in our body. So this one, like omega-3s and so on, could be beneficial rather than shakes, as you said. When it comes to training, you have very specific type of training because it's SST, which combines the hard training with the heavy weights and the metabolic weight, metabolic stress. So are you sticking with every client, and do you demand them to do the same SST, or do you have people who are just because I know that you have worked with Ian, with Shed with great success, and did they train always the same way, or did you give them the freedom of their own choice of training?
A lot of guys, I prefer to give a freedom. But you have to be sure that they know what they're doing. Yeah. I'm, as a coach, setting up training plans is very difficult, because you are not in that body. You don't feel a certain exercise. Obviously, you can give an advice on where to focus on, maybe certain exercises more than others. But at the end of the day, if you have an experienced athlete, like you mentioned, for example, then it's best that they put their own knowledge inside the training. And where I come into play is maybe giving certain guidelines in terms of volume, rep ranges, those things that I do, but then how to set up and which exercises to focus on. Maybe here and there, some, transition from one muscle group to the other, or maybe we need a muscle group that needs to be trained more often, things like that, yes. But specifically setting up a training plan, I don't like to do. Maybe with less experienced bodybuilders, which sometimes they're not really training hard. They think they do, but so that's where you actually want to put in a little extra, because you need that extra to compensate for the quality work that you
Patrick,
do.
sorry to interrupt, but you mentioned a really, really important thing. What does it mean to train hard? Because for many people, train hard is to move a weight from place A to B with zero technique, to be honest, or just to, that's what they mean by training hard. They don't watch their execution. And so what does it mean? Because it's as well really important when it comes to being a, coachable athlete, to do things right training wise.
That's very hard to say, David. What's training hard? I mean, hard for somebody may be totally different than for somebody else. It always depends on on the experience levels, how many years you'll be doing it, but maybe to explain is really how well are you able to connect to that target exercise and reps that you're doing, and really give everything that you have, all the energy available in that moment, in that set, you're able to give for those reps that you are trying to do and reach, concentric failures. But how every athlete is able to develop this strength, this energy, release this is something that you learn with time. It's a talent some people have. Maybe some develop it faster, some take a little more time, but just being in that moment, in that set, how well, you connect your mind to the muscle and are able to really give your maximum in that one set is something few people really can do, so it's and measure it. I don't think you can put a number on it. It's a talent people have, some people less. So it's something you learn with time. But many times I ask people to send me a video of their top set of exercises. And, from experience, you can see immediately what's going on. It's like you see a boxer punching, you can see where you can hear that noise. Is it really all in, or is it just you think you're all in? So it's very subjective. It's hard to say, but when an athlete knows how to do that, then I really don't have to do much. The intensity, it's more important than really, setting up reps, rest pauses, or whatever you do. If you give your maximum in 10 reps, then that's good. And we just try to do a little bit better the next time. So there are a lot of theories out there. I also, developed a training system, which is very efficient, but at the end of the day, everything works if you really put your 100% to it, and if you're able to develop, what you were saying, that intensity and that stimulus inside that set. But that's something a coach really can do. Either you have it or you don't.
Speaking about giving too much, because often you give someone a cycle or something like this, and people, how often do you see that, for example, you prescribe someone X, and post-show, he's like, yeah, but I took 2 times more, because he thought, we as bodybuilders are mental. That's why we hire coaches, because our heads are not working right, especially closer to the show. And then they hire you, for example, you give them some kind of, doses, and suddenly you hear they take 2 times more, 3 times more, because they think that more is better. It's the same with everything. More is better when it comes to training. They think more is better when it comes to diet, when eating more. And as you said, there are times when you need to eat less. There are times when you need to train less. And there are times when you need to take nothing.
Yeah, but what do you want me to say?
It happens.
I've seen it happen a lot of times, unfortunately. Maybe I can add to that. In today's steroid market, there are just a lot of bad quality products out there. And if you think that, taking 2 or 3 times more of what you're supposed to, it's probably because what you're taking is not good. Because if I know the doses, and if you're taking what I'm telling you to, and the stuff is good, then you see results. And if you do not see the results, then maybe you should not do bodybuilding.
I remember Jay Rota, this young German guy. He was like, I remember because we were interviewing, we were speaking with Joe Seaman, and he said that for like half of the prep, you were like, you didn't know what's going on. You were doing everything right. And suddenly you told him, hey, what are your, is your stuff real? And he suddenly checked it, changed it, and his body changed, clicked within a week. It looked totally different. So as you said, there is a lot of junk on the market. Patrick, two more easy questions to end it up. First of all, are you still training? And if you are training, do you train with your athletes when they come?
I do train with some athletes, but personally, I don't weight train anymore.
Okay.
I do other activities, bike, walking, swimming. Now I live right here by a lake. Um, I just feel like my cardiovascular health is way more important than, staying big and muscular. And for me, it has never been really fun to go in the gym and lift weights. I always did it because I had a purpose, to look a certain way. Right now, I really don't care the way I look. I don't want to, be a big guy. And actually, my cardiovascular health is the more important. So I do every day some activity. Most of the time is riding a bike. And sometimes I even, play some basketball and things like that. But weightlifting is just not fun for me, having to drive to gym, go in the gym. And then most of the time, I have people come to me all the time asking questions and things. And I really cannot even enjoy what I'm doing anymore, especially here where I live. As soon as I get close to a gym, I have people come up and start talking to me. So I've never been able to just, train, talk. If I do something, I do it right. So I prefer to take my bike and really go full pull here along the lake. Nobody's talking to me, wind in my face. And even in the wintertime, I do it. So I keep active that way, but lifting weights is not something I really enjoy doing.
And speaking about the people who are really coachable and showed that they are, what the hell has been Keon doing and eating? How does he progress so fast? Because he's growing now in the prep season. And I heard that in the future, his plan is go to the open, which can be huge and can happen. And to be honest, after watching Derek, we all believe that it is possible.
Look, we're thinking way too much ahead. What we're thinking of right now is we have a show in 12 days and show a good package there, and then leave some room until Olympia, because we don't have 10 weeks after we have the Olympia. So just making sure we bring a really nice package to Texas, which is going to be enough to win, and then push some more into the Olympia. But open, let's be on top of the hill in the 212 before we start, talking about going into the open class.
I still think that Keon can be a threat. I know that you are not a guy that is going to come in here and like pray your guys that they are going to win the Olympia and win the 12 titles and so on. But I think that he's going to be a major contender because of what I've seen that you guys done, especially with his weaker body parts and his legs, which were lacking. They are not lacking anymore. And I'm happy to see him because he's a good guy. Just he needed some kind of spark, and I'm happy that you guys found it. Thank you, Patrick, for your time. It was a pleasure, and it was loads of experience and knowledge again. And I hope that everyone is going to enjoy it. Do you still take clients? And if yes, then how they can contact you?
Well, they can contact me at my email, bigpat@hotmail.ch. You can find it on my Instagram P Tour page. And I'm always up to new clients. If it fits, if the person has the right mindset, if he's not writing me that he wants to be Mr. Olympia in 2 years, then maybe I can help.
Damn, I wanted to try to become a Mr. Olympia in 2 years. I'm not a pro yet, but perhaps next time I will contact you when I'm closer to the Mr. Olympia stage. Thank you, Patrick, so much.
My pleasure, my friend.